Hi everyone, Jason here. We'll be talking about one of our favorite topics, AI, this time with a focus on safety and security. We went a bit over time, so we've decided to split into two parts. So this will be part one, and we'll be posting part two over the next couple of weeks. So please enjoy the episode.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Idea Roastery. I'm Jason.
And I'm Herman.
So Herman, do you like productivity apps?
Productivity apps. So I actually recently wanted to get one of those time trackers. You're familiar with like Toggle and Clockify?
Yeah, I've started using some.
Yeah, and the reason that I actually wanted to do that wasn't necessarily because I wanted to be more productive. It's just that I wanted to measure how much time I spent on moderation on Bear, the blogging platform I run, because I wanted to kind of gauge if I needed to hire someone, because I'll spend like time doing it, and some time has passed. I'm like, I have no idea how long or how much time I spend per week on these tasks. So I really wanted to quantify it. And so I went to go and sign up for Clockify. And you have to put in your email address and set a password, and then it sends you the confirmation email, and then it tries to get you to upgrade. And there's all these additional features and everything. And I'm like, this is actually a lot of work for something that is fairly simple. And so I'd been seeing these sort of, we'll call them like vibe coding tools, like Lovable or V And yes, I've used Cursor as an IDE for a while, but I wanted to try one of these like pure vibe coding tools where like the programming language is English. And so I opened up V and I just gave it like a very rough spec for a simple version of Clockify that essentially just said time tracker, that I can set the name of a task, select a project, and it just gives me a tally for it throughout the day, as well as a list of the tasks. And it one-shotted it. And it was almost perfect. You get something like 5 free messages with V Naught, and I so I essentially built this entire tool with just 5 messages, and it worked. And it stored all of the data in local storage in the browser, which is actually all I wanted. It didn't need to be synced with a server, right? Now, yes, granted, it doesn't have like reports that you can send to clients and all these other features, but I didn't need that either. It was just like I just needed this ephemeral piece of software. And I've been using this for the last week, and I'd pressed the deploy to Vercel button, and it deployed it to Vercel. This is a man who's never written Next.js in his life.
Yeah, it's a great experience, right? I've also played around with V Naught or V0, depending on how you say it. And yeah, like I think especially for like a mock-up stage, it's been super useful to use, and really I've been quite impressed by it. Just like purely, just putting in very rough guidelines seems to work pretty well. What did you find at the end? Were you spending a lot of time doing moderation, or was it enough to warrant making
No,
a new tool?
it turns out I spend between half an hour and an hour a day on
Okay.
support emails, moderation, reviewing new blogs, stuff like that. So I can't actually justify getting a person in. I mean, I could justify it, but I actually do like that human Herman touch where people receive emails from me and I can keep a finger on the pulse of the
Mm,
platform as opposed to handing off that responsibility. And it's
mm.
actually not that much work, so I like, come on.
Yeah.
I can do that.
And as someone who's into like I feel like your ethos is very much like built yourself, like very thoughtfully created products and features and tools. Do you think that this AI tool V0 fits into that ethos of like being quite meticulous about how things are built? Or, I mean, would you use this for one of your front end facing apps?
That's actually a very good question, and something I have been giving quite a bit of thought to is that with, let's take for instance, Bear, it is a big code base, and I am so hyper familiar with it that I can write better code for it than
Mm,
Cursor, let's say. which backed by Claude 3.7. And I actually want to be very intentional about the code that I write for it because that is also my project, my baby, and I like knowing what's happening over there. With that timer app that I just mentioned, I looked at the code and I'm like, I have no idea how any of this works. It's essentially a black box. So as soon as, and remember, this is a very, very simple app, right? As soon as any additional complexity comes in there, it remains and becomes even darker of a black box. And I have no ability to maintain it. And so I have become entirely dependent on the AI to go and make those modifications. And I can't actually check the code to validate my assumptions about the code, right? I mean, I can roughly read it, but it's it's not it's not how I want to build software, like proper software. However, I've been thinking of it more in terms of like ephemeral software or like small apps, small single purpose apps you can generate on the fly, right? You're like, oh, I want an app that generates, sorry, that helps me calculate my income tax, right? Super easy to do. Um, and yes, there are other tools that are on there, but other tools that do that, but they're laden with ads and everything, and you have to search for them, and then you have to go through Google, and you have to scroll through the SEO slop. And so these smaller tools are actually inherently generatable. What's interesting though is that I actually see AI killing off a bunch of smaller projects that don't have the scale and complexity necessary to create a moat or other things that create a moat. So, for example, my one company, Just Sketch Me, it's a 3D modeling tool that, artists can pose models. And right now it's still pretty complex and you can't really generate it with AI without strong technical skills yourself, but I don't think that that will always be the case. And so theoretically, in the future, someone will be able to just generate that and they won't need Just Sketch Me, right? Whereas with Bear, it's community centric. It's based on trust. People trust that I have good intentions for the platform and I'm working on its longevity. And they also trust that it is secure and that their data is secure and their accounts are secure. And I've, verified all of that personally. Whereas, especially something that's like purely a client-side tool, like no one needs to pay for that. Oh, sorry, no one's going to pay for those in the future when they can just generate them.
Yeah, I think there's two like interesting thoughts there. I think the first one is like people just generating their own tools instead of going out and seeking other people who've built those tools. I think, yeah, like it can bring about a bit more, I guess, flexibility from people who are like running businesses. They can kind of whatever they can think up, they can build like a type of tool. But I think when it comes to things that are becoming more complex, then it does. I feel like people are still going to need to use some sort of software developer at some point, because I've been in the case where I've built like really sort of quite complicated mockups, but then, as you said before, so at some point you are having to sort of revert to going into the code. And at that point, I start to make this trade-off of like, well, do I develop it myself or do I just hand this off to someone else? And so I think when it comes to like just coding up your own stuff, I think it does have a bit of a benefit right in the beginning when you're like ideating. But when it comes to the maintenance side and actually like building something that's going to be sort of an ongoing part of your business, I think that it's going to necessitate that you have some sort of like validation in that part. And that could be a developer or it could be something. And I think the other part is like the second factor is that the UX and brand of what you've built is kind of in a way a proxy for the quality, right? Whereas you mentioned like if I want to build something that's going to create my income taxes for me, I'm going to bloody well hope that it does a good job and correctly. And this is where I start to think about the breakdown of this idea where you can just generate any sort of application. Is that I don't see yet why you would want to build, for instance, like an accounting system from scratch, right? If there's already one that exists. And so I almost see it as like it's very good for building interfaces, but it's not necessarily good at building core functionality. And so my idea is that like later in the future, we're probably going to see these different functionality blocks that are available, but they're only interfaced by some sort of AI layer, right? Because I think if you've got like a working feature inside of a CRM or whatever, like why would you want to recreate that from scratch and have like 10,000 different versions of it, and then like each company has their own way of doing it.
I think you're completely right. Yeah, and it really comes down to, I think, the complexity of the build, right? So again, something like my little time tracker is, to me, it just I could make it opinionated in exactly what I want. Um, and the sort of hassle of dealing with a tool that is trying to get you to monetize is sometimes a bit too, or trying to get you to pay is sometimes a bit too high. So it's like, let's take, for instance, I don't actually know what the monetization of specifically Clockify or Toggle is, but if it's something like Splitwise, which I'll talk about now, is you can log 3 expenses per day, right? Anything more than that, and you have to upgrade. And so I didn't want to run the risk of going and starting to use a tool and then getting to a point where, oh, I actually now need to upgrade in order to carry on using it for my task that is actually fairly trivial and I could do it with an egg timer, right? Um, so that there are some additional security implications of vibe coded things. Do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, so I do have quite a few opinions. I think first of all, as you've pointed out, with like generating code that's you don't know how to read, I think that is first of all that is a problem, because I think although in a sense, if you think of the owner of a business as like you're like the brand and the presence, and you're giving that sort of seal of approval when it comes to your software that you provide. In a sense, you kind of don't really care how it's done. It's kind of as long as it's done and it provides that value. But if you're not able to verify that it is doing the thing that you expect it to do, then it could potentially create security issues, right? Like you don't want to have code that you've not vetted in a sense. And I guess there's a point you could say that AI, you could use AI to generate tests, and but then you've got to check that the tests are vetted, right? So I think
Yeah,
there's
who
this
watches the watcher?
exactly, and I think there's also this sort of prompt injection kind of security issue that's coming about, where you could have a language model that you've connected it up to Cursor, you're coding away, it's providing suggestions, and it provides a suggestion that's insecure in a sense, and you might not know it, or you might just like tab, and suddenly you've got a vulnerability in your code that you might not necessarily know about. And so in terms of security of actually creating vulnerabilities, I think there's definitely something that is a challenge.
You've seen those tweets, and there's quite a few of them going around right now, where someone will be like, "Yeah, no, I just vibe coded my entire startup, and I have paying customers. Check
Yeah.
out the website over here." And then like a tweet a little bit later, like, "Guys, please stop! Someone's writing data to my database. All of my API keys are maxed out." And you take a look at it, and it's like, okay, this guy literally has all of his like API keys and stuff hard coded into the client side code where anyone can just go and inspect it in a web browser. And so there's those things which are, have obvious implications. And so a second little app that I went and vibe coded is my partner Emma and I have taken the next step in our relationship, and we've decided to get a joint bank account. Um, but we also sometimes spend money from our, let's say, for instance, business bank account or from our personal bank accounts for things that are realistically should be shared between us. So this is, think of it as kind of like Splitwise, an app where you can log expenses, except instead of owing it to each other, it's our joint bank account owes it to us, right? And so it's a very specific tool that no one's made because this is super niche. But I went and I vibe coded that. Now, the difference over there is that I can't store everything in browser because Emma needs to be able to use it. I need to be able to use it. And so I went and said, okay, let's hook it up to JSON bin, which is just a JSON in the back end. We can write some unstructured or some structured data to there, and that works fairly well for that. But it goes and it like just hard codes the API keys directly into the browser, and there's no real security whatsoever. It's like anyone can go and inspect the code and grab that information. Now they've got access to my entire JSON bin account. So I had to personally go and with this I did it with Cursor. So I actually had access to the code, and I went and I converted everything from Next.js to be vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And I'm like, just minify it as much as, not minify it, just make it as simple as possible so I could actually read it. I went and I read it, and I did some stuff about around authentication and keeping tokens in a cookie instead of having it hard coded into the actual website itself. And now it works perfectly. And we now have this little app between us. However, if I didn't know about web authentication, I would have just been like, cool, this works, publish it. And now someone's got, the entire internet has got my API keys for the service, and they could go and max it out and make my life difficult.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of those guys, and I'm undecided whether it's just a marketing hack that you just tend to get a lot of reviews when people say, "Oh, look at this guy, he fucked up, he can't code properly."
All press is good press, huh?
Skill issue, exactly. So I feel like some people are doing this on purpose, like accidentally leaking their like end file keys. But I think what the other it does raise another point, which is it's kind of similar but not quite. Is that I feel that people are becoming so used to this idea that you can just copy paste into a chat box. And this is another worry that I have with AI, and I don't want to be like a complete doomer, but if you think about it, like we're starting to see it, like you've got AI chats interfaces almost everywhere. And I think the layperson, not to kind of downplay them at all, but the layperson is quite happy to just copy paste financial information and paste it into OpenAI and let it do some magic in the background and then get a result, right? And I think this is where there is a secondary problem where people are just so used to that now you're starting to get some of these like Chinese AI companies. I've seen a couple of them doing very suspicious things. Like they're like, oh, yeah, use this Chinese AI to vibe code a patient record database. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And I think this problem is maybe more of an educational thing. And in a sense, I also think this is something that you get with an experienced software developer, right? As a business person, you're just like, I just need this app and it needs to do this, this, and this. And you tell the software developer, this is a good software developer, because arguably there are bad software developers who would still create something that's insecure. But if you have a good software developer or like an agency, you're not just getting the code, the functionality, you're also getting, again, that like verification that there is some sort of security. And I think what maybe business folk who are like building these apps miss is that there is actually this secondary side to software development of like, how do you actually make sure that your data isn't getting leaked and that people aren't able to just, interact with your sort of personal data, and that security standards are maintained. And I think that's where I see a big challenge, because it's not even something that I can control anymore, because, I don't know if my email and personal details are in some database and someone's just said, oh, I'm going to just vibe code myself some analytics using like the latest Chinese AI interface. And then suddenly all of this data is getting flooded over to the Chinese database. And I think this is where, again, it's more like a privacy concern, and there's arguments saying like, oh well, it's the greater good is better than whatever downside it is. But I think it's going to become a very big attack vector, especially if you look at like different nations fighting each other, or just from a pure privacy point of view, that
Completely.
we need to start thinking about these kind of issues.
So on that, one of the things that I've noticed on Bear is there has been a dramatic increase in the number of scrapers out there. And so there are two kinds of scrapers. The first one is what I assume are uh, some of these less regulated states like China that are building out these AI tools, and they just need huge swaths of data. So as far as I can tell, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, they're pretty good at identifying themselves. They say, this is the, GPT scraper, and we're here to scrape your data. And so I block all of those. And they mostly respect robots.txt, but not really. So I have to have some web application firewall rules to prevent it. Um, but I get hundreds of thousands of scrape requests per day. By request, I mean it's a web request. It's asking my server for a web page, and they identify themselves as, oh, it's just Google Chrome. Oh, it's just I'm just a Microsoft Edge, and it's not. It's because you can see them systematically scraping swaths and swaths of data, following do not follow links, etc., etc. And so this is both, creating like a uh, widespread DDoS attack, because it'll be like, 80,000 requests in a minute and a half, and your web server is like, ugh. Um, but then there's a secondary one, and I'm not too sure whether this is because there are more insecure sites on the internet due to vibe coding, or because people have access to these tools to help them write malicious scrapers. But they are scrapers that are specifically looking for mistakes that you have made. And so it'll go and it will scrape um, uh, all the endpoints that you would have accidentally left something lying around on. So it would scrape for like .aws files, .ssh files, .env files, /backup, backup.tar, backup.zip, and it will go and it'll scrape like 200 different variations of things that you would have accidentally left lying around, just to see. So now we have an increase in the number of insecure websites and web apps, and we have an increase in the number of tools that are going and scraping websites to see if they are insecure. So we're kind of like automating hacking. So like one of the things with Bear is that it's completely open source, right? Without a doubt, people have run AI tools against that repository to say, what are some attack vectors over here that Herman hasn't thought of? And so I've run the same thing. I've pointed Claude at my code base and been like, what could potentially be exploited over here? And right now everything's looking gravy, but it's just a really good example of how you need to take care of yourself in this slightly more dangerous internet.
I think that it's it's a very valid point, and it's been there even before AI, I think, because
Oh,
like,
completely. It's just the scale of it that's different.
yeah, it's also that it's more accessible because now someone else
Mm.
could figure out how to build that, or they could vibe code that, and I don't really know how to get around it, because ideally you want to keep. What I'm worried about is that this is going to lead to kind of like a walled garden effect. First of all, with tools like V0 and some of these AI generation tools, first of all, like they generate code in like Next.js, right? Because that's what Vercel is kind of backing, right? And you're going to have this, I feel, in a couple of domains where it's, I've just vibe coded my thing with this tool, and that tool is very specifically used to create this kind of code. But then it's also when it comes to this idea of agents and agents talking to each other, where it's like you're going to have like different parts communicating with each other. And unless you have like a secure agent, or like, I don't think it's fair to let people just be able to create these insecure agents. And so it's almost going to force people to say, well, just work within our ecosystem or within our like tool chain and everything will be secure. But then that's going to lead to people being like, well, I'm just going to use this secure tool chain and rather than go and create my own thing. And I feel like that's going to be almost a negative effect, because not only is it the non-technical decision makers that are going to do that. They're going to just, I'll just use whatever is the best tool for the job. It's going to almost end up kind of like the Apple situation with Apple and Androids. It's like Apple is the best tool for that ecosystem. OpenAI is going to be the best tool for that ecosystem, and you're going to have these almost like different islands of technology that are going to kind of exist. And maybe it will just be like duopolies or like a couple of big players, but I don't see someone self-hosting as much, because there is going to be these security, or at least technical people will self-host, but will a business who's like worried about security look at self-hosting as an option?
Yeah, that's actually a very good point, and I think a good example of that happened before the AI boom is email servers. Is that you can theoretically go and run your own email server. However, it's very not advised, because it's a moderation nightmare, because the email as a protocol is just clogged end to end with spam. And so if you don't have good spam filtering, if you don't have things set up to mark you as a verified sender, your emails are going to go to spam. And so you actually just create a lot of friction for yourself by not using, your Gmail or Proton Mail or Tutas of the world. And so the same thing is kind of happening with self-hosting, is that if you are self-hosting something right now, you have to worry about the same things that I have to worry about. The difference is I'm worrying about a couple thousand blogs, whereas you just have to worry about your own blog. But the thing is still the same. Hey, listen, it's gonna get inadvertently DDoS'd. You have to make sure to not leave your stuff lying around. Make no mistakes, because if you make a mistake now, it will be seen. Whereas like historically, we could kind of get away with being a bit more lax about our programming, where it's like, no one's looking here. Now, you shouldn't have been lax back then. This has led to a lot of high profile hacks, but now it's like, instead of there being a, handful of penetration testers, we're going to now see like widespread pen test bots just scraping everything all the time to see if there's ever, a little door left unlocked.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of our AI double episode. Please subscribe so you can get a notification when we release part 2. Have a lovely day.